Zuri woke up that morning in Kamanga with a smile on her face, not knowing her life was about to change forever. The city outside was busy as always, cars rushing, people hurrying. But in her heart there was a calm excitement. She had given so many years of her life to Alpha Holdings, working late nights, skipping family events, pouring her energy into tasks that most people never even noticed. She believed that hard work and loyalty would finally pay off, that her sacrifices would one day open doors for her. As she walked into the tall glass building, she straightened her shoulders, carrying not just her handbag, but also a quiet hope that maybe today would be different. Colleagues passed by with quick greetings, but Zuri's heart was whispering louder than the noise around her. She thought about her late father's words. Keep planting seeds, one day the harvest will come. She believed her harvest was near. She entered the office ready to give her best, unaware that this very ordinary day, the kind that begins like any other, was about to turn into the most unforgettable chapter of her life. Would you like me to continue writing part 2, The Public Humiliation, in the same style and detail? The morning meeting started like every other. The staff gathered in the large conference room, the long table polished until it shined, files stacked neatly, and cups of tea steaming in front of some employees. Zuri sat quietly in her usual seat, her notebook open, ready to write down instructions. She believed it would be another routine meeting where targets would be discussed and praises shared. But that morning carried a storm she did not see coming. Madame Chibale, the boss, walked in with her sharp heels clicking against the floor. Her eyes scanned the room like a hawk searching for prey. Everyone straightened up, some even forcing fake smiles to win her favor. Zuri looked at her with respect, unaware of what was about to happen. Suddenly, in a cold and cutting voice, Madame Chibale said, "Before we begin, there is something I need to address." She turned her gaze to Zuri, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Zuri, you are the weakest link in this company. Your work is sloppy, your presence unnecessary, and from today you are fired." The room went silent for a second, as if time itself froze. Then whispers started to rise, mixed with muffled laughter. Some colleagues lowered their heads, not out of respect but to hide their smirks. Others exchanged glances that said, "Finally, it's her." Zuri sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear. She had never been publicly insulted like that before. She felt as if the floor had been pulled out from under her. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall. She stood slowly, every movement heavy, every step echoing with humiliation. Nobody stood up for her. Not a single person said, "That's unfair." Instead, she walked out of that room carrying not just her box of belongings, but the sharp wound of betrayal. Little did anyone know, that very moment of shame would be the seed of her greatest victory. Would you like me to now write part 3, The Walk of Shame, 300 to 350 words, in the SAM? Zuri's hands shook as she placed her few belongings into a small cardboard box. A framed photo of her mother, a notebook filled with years of ideas, a pen she had kept since her very first day. It all looked so little compared to the years she had given to the company. The room was quiet, but the silence was heavy, broken only by the clicking of keyboards and the occasional cough. No one dared to look at her directly. Those who did stole quick glances, then turned away as if her pain was too inconvenient for them to notice. A few colleagues wore pity in their eyes, but their lips remained sealed. They wanted to speak, but fear of Madame Chibale's wrath kept them frozen. Others smirked openly, their whispers crawling across the room like poison. Zuri could hear the soft chuckles, the murmurs that said, "She had it coming." Every word cut deeper than the boss's insult. When she finally closed the box, she straightened her back and stood tall. Her legs felt weak, but her pride held her upright. She walked slowly through the office, her heels echoing against the tiles, each step heavy with humiliation. The same hallway she had walked 1,000 times now felt like a battlefield where she was leaving defeated. People moved aside to let her pass, but no one reached out to hold her hand. Not one voice said, "We believe in you." As she approached the elevator, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall in front of the people who once called her a friend. The doors closed with a soft ding, sealing her shame inside her chest. But as the elevator descended, she whispered to herself, "They may take my job, but they will never take my dignity." At that moment, she didn't know that this walk of shame was not the end of her story. It was the painful beginning of her rise. Do you want me to continue with part 4, the silent prayer, 300 to 350 words, in the same emotional and viral tone? The bright sun hit Zuri's face as she stepped out of the tall glass building for the last time. The city of Kamanga moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars honking, street vendors calling out, people rushing to work. Yet for Zuri the world felt painfully still. She held the small box of her belongings close to her chest, the weight of it nothing compared to the heaviness pressing down on her heart. Every step she took away from Alpha Holdings felt like another reminder of how quickly life could change. One moment she was an employee with dreams of promotion, and the next she was walking out as if she had never mattered. She reached the edge of the sidewalk and paused. Her legs wanted to collapse, her chest burned with unshed tears, but her spirit refused to break. Lifting her face toward the sky, she whispered softly, almost trembling, "God, if this is my end, let it also be my beginning." Her words floated into the air, fragile yet powerful, carrying both her pain and her hope. She knew she had lost something, but she also believed deep down that God had not forgotten her. Pedestrians passed by without noticing her silent struggle, yet inside her heart a quiet strength began to stir. She wiped the corner of her eyes quickly, not wanting strangers to see her tears. She reminded herself of her mother's old saying, "Sometimes rejection is God's redirection." Those words became her shield as she took another step forward. Zuri walked down the busy street with nothing in her hands but a box, and nothing in her heart but dignity. She did not know where she was going or what tomorrow would bring, but she promised herself one thing, that this pain would not destroy her. It would build her. And though the world saw her leaving in defeat, heaven was already writing the first lines of her victory. Do you want me to continue with part 5, rumors in the office, 300 to 350 words, in the same emotional viral style? Inside the walls of Alpha Holdings, life went on as if nothing had happened. The morning after Zuri's exit, Madame Chibale entered the office with an extra bounce in her step. Her sharp heels clicked louder than usual, and her smile carried a cruel satisfaction. In her mind she had done something great. She had removed the weak link. She stood before her staff in the meeting room, her voice dripping with pride as she announced, "Now that the dead weight is gone, this company will finally move forward." Her eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to disagree. Zinel, her favorite assistant, sat beside her, glowing under the sudden spotlight. Madame Chibale patted her shoulder like she was passing on a crown. "Zinel," she declared, "you are what true dedication looks like. Unlike some people, you will never disappoint me." The words stung the hearts of those who still remembered Zuri's quiet hard work, but no one dared to speak. Fear chained their tongues and ambition kept their heads bowed. Whispers began to spread in hushed tones. Some said Zuri was gone forever, a forgotten shadow. Others, secretly uneasy, wondered why Madame Chibale had taken so much pleasure in her downfall. Around the office corners and in private chats, gossip grew. Some mocked Zuri, saying she was too soft for the corporate world. Others whispered with pity, remembering the dignity in her eyes as she walked away. Madame Chibale, blind with arrogance, could not see what was coming. She thought she had ended Zuri's story. She thought she had buried her. But in reality, she had only planted a seed. And as the staff went back to their desks, carrying both fear and whispers, none of them could imagine that the very woman they dismissed so quickly was about to return in a way that would shake Alpha Holdings to its core. Do you want me to move forward with part 6, the unexpected announcement, 300 to 350 words? In the same tone? A week passed, but the air inside Alpha Holdings was no longer the same. The confidence that once filled the halls had been replaced with tension and nervous whispers. From the reception desk to the finance department, one rumor kept spreading like wildfire. Alpha Holdings had been bought. A mysterious new owner had taken over, and no one knew who it was. In the cafeteria, groups of employees leaned close, speaking in hushed tones. "Do you think it's a foreign investor?" one asked. "Maybe a politician," another replied. Some feared layoffs, others dreamed of promotions. The uncertainty was louder than the clinking of spoons and the hum of computers. Even the managers, usually proud and untouchable, were suddenly restless. Madame Chibale pretended to be unbothered, strutting around in her expensive suits as though nothing could shake her. But behind her cold smile, she was deeply unsettled. She had heard the rumors too, And though she told herself she would impress whoever this new owner was, a quiet fear tugged at her chest. Still, in front of her staff, she raised her chin and said, "Whoever they are, they will see that I am the backbone of this company." Zinel, seated by her side, smirked, feeling untouchable now that she was her boss's favorite. Around them, however, anxiety continued to rise. Every phone call from an unknown number made employees jump. Every email notification sent a ripple of panic through the office. Finally, an official memo arrived. The new owner would be revealed in a grand meeting at the headquarters the following week. All staff were required to attend. The moment the news hit, hearts raced faster, and whispers grew louder. Everyone wanted to know who was powerful enough to take over Alpha Holdings overnight. What they did not know was that the answer would shock them to their core, and the name they would hear would leave Madame Chibale pale with fear. Do you want me to continue with Part 7, the day of the reveal, 350 words? In the S. The morning of the big reveal arrived like a storm. From the moment employees walked into Alpha Holdings, the atmosphere was thick with nerves. The conference hall, usually used for training and presentations, had been decorated with fresh flowers and polished to perfection. Rows of chairs faced the stage where the new owner would be introduced. Every employee was required to attend, and no one dared to be late. By 9 a.m. the hall was full. Some employees whispered anxiously, others sat in silence, their minds racing with possibilities. The sound of shuffling feet and low conversations filled the air. Every face carried the same question. Who is it? Even the managers, normally arrogant and untouchable, were uneasy. Madame Chibale, however, walked in like a queen ready for her coronation. She wore her most expensive navy blue suit, her heels clicking proudly against the floor. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her perfume strong enough to announce her presence before she even entered the room. She believed this was her moment to shine. "When the new boss sees me," she whispered to Zinel, "they will know who truly runs this place." Zinel nodded eagerly, dressed in her sharpest outfit, thrilled to stand by her boss's side. But beneath the surface, even Madame Chibale felt the tremor of uncertainty. Her heart raced, though she hid it behind a confident smile. She couldn't afford to show fear, not in front of her staff. She adjusted her jacket and sat in the front row, legs crossed, head held high, ready to charm whoever stepped through those doors. The lights dimmed slightly, and the murmur of voices fell into silence. The stage was ready, the staff sat on edge, and time itself seemed to pause. The doors at the back of the hall slowly opened, and all eyes turned at once. The moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived, but no one was prepared for the shock that was about to walk in. Do you want me to continue with Part 8, the shock? The doors at the back of the conference hall opened slowly, and everyone's eyes turned toward them. For a moment the entire room held its breath. Then, as the figure stepped inside, a wave of gasps rolled through the hall like a sudden wind. It was Zuri. She was not the quiet, overlooked employee they once mocked. She walked with her head high, her presence commanding respect without her saying a single word. She wore a breathtaking African-inspired gown, its golden embroidery shimmering under the lights. The fabric flowed with elegance, the colors bold yet graceful, making her look like royalty. Each step she took toward the stage was steady, confident, and filled with quiet power. The staff stared in disbelief. Some clutched their mouths, unable to hide their shock. Others whispered furiously, their words tumbling over each other. Is that really her? How is Zuri here? The same people who had laughed at her humiliation were now frozen, their eyes wide with awe. At the front row, Madame Chibale's perfect smile cracked. For a moment she didn't even blink, her body stiff as stone. Her mind raced, but her face betrayed everything: fear, confusion, disbelief. Her painted lips trembled, and her confident aura drained away like water slipping through her fingers. The woman she had thrown out like garbage was now standing in the very place she had prepared to impress. Zuri didn't rush. She let the silence stretch, her footsteps echoing across the hall, every beat of her heels striking Madame Chibale's pride. She carried herself not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a queen who had found her crown. When she finally reached the stage, she turned slowly, her eyes sweeping over the faces that once turned away from her. The hall was silent again. But this time it wasn't fear of Madame Chibale. It was respect, mixed with shame, mixed with awe. And as Zuri stood before them, glowing in her dignity. Everyone knew without a single announcement that the world ends. The silence in the conference hall was thick, every eye locked on Zuri. People waited, their hearts pounding, desperate to understand how the woman they once saw packing her things in shame was now standing before them with such authority. Then the truth began to unfold, piece by piece, like a story too powerful to keep hidden. After being fired so cruelly, Zuri had left Alpha Holdings with nothing but dignity. But while Madame Chibale thought she had ended her, others had been watching. A group of seasoned investors, who had long admired Zuri's dedication and brilliance from afar, reached out to her. They had seen what many in the office ignored: her intelligence, her vision, her ability to solve problems with grace. They told her, "We believe in you. You are not a failure. You are the future." With their support, Zuri was given the chance to do something no one expected. The investors placed in her hands the resources and trust she needed, and in a matter of weeks, Zuri made a bold move. She bought controlling shares of Alpha Holdings, the very company that had humiliated her. What seemed like a cruel ending had become the doorway to an unimaginable beginning. Now standing on the stage, she didn't need to brag or shout. Her presence was enough. Her gown shimmered like victory itself, but it was the strength in her eyes that silenced the room. She looked at the employees, the same people who had watched her walk out in shame, and she knew they were witnessing history. Madame Chibale's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. For the first time, the woman who thrived on control was powerless. Zuri, once her victim, was now her boss. The tables had turned in the most dramatic way, and no one could deny it. This was more than a comeback, it was a transformation. "Do you want me to continue with part 10? Madame Chibale's pale face, 350 words, in the same viral and emotional style? Madame Chibale sat frozen in her chair, her body stiff as stone. Her hands, once always steady and commanding, now trembled slightly on her lap. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale, almost ghost-like. For years she had controlled the room with just a glance, but today her power slipped through her fingers. She stared at Zuri, her eyes wide with disbelief, her lips trembling as if they no longer obeyed her. Finally, in a voice that cracked like glass, she stammered, "Zuri, you're the new owner?" The question hung in the air, though everyone already knew the answer. The same woman Madame Chibale had mocked, humiliated, and thrown out like trash was now standing at the very top. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of shame pressing down on them. They had witnessed Zuri's humiliation and done nothing. Yet now they were watching her rise higher than they ever imagined. Madame Chibale tried to force a smile, but it looked twisted and weak. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead, and for the first time her sharp tongue failed her. She remembered the words she had once thrown at Zuri in front of everyone. "You are the weakest link." But looking at her now, regal and powerful, those words came back to stab her own pride. Zuri didn't rush to answer. She let the silence stretch, her calm presence saying more than words ever could. She stood tall, her golden gown shimmering under the lights, her eyes steady and filled with quiet strength. Madame Chibale could feel the walls closing in, her empire crumbling before her eyes. The woman she had once dismissed as nothing had become everything she feared. That pale face told a story on its own. The story of pride collapsing, of arrogance meeting justice, and of power shifting into the hands of the one she thought would never matter. "Do you want me to continue with part 11, the staff's reaction, 350 words, in the same emotional, dramatic?" For a moment, the conference hall was frozen in silence. Everyone's eyes darted between Zuri, standing tall and radiant, and Madame Chibale, pale and trembling. Then slowly, like a wave beginning to rise, the sound of clapping filled the room. At first it was hesitant, a few hands meeting in cautious applause, but soon it grew louder, stronger, and unstoppable. The same employees who once looked away when Zuri was humiliated now stood to their feet, clapping with admiration. Some clapped with tears in their eyes, ashamed of how they had stayed silent when she needed them most. Others bowed their heads, unable to meet her gaze, their faces burning with guilt. They remembered how they had whispered behind her back, laughed at her pain, and allowed Madame Chibale's cruelty to go unchallenged. Now they realized the truth, they had misjudged her completely. Whispers rippled across the hall, carried by awe and regret. "We never knew she was destined for greatness," one voice said. She was always different, we just didn't see it, another admitted. Those words spread like wildfire, echoing the emotions everyone felt, but could not put into full sentences. Zuri had gone from a figure of pity to a symbol of hope, all in one breathtaking moment. Even those who had mocked her the loudest now found themselves clapping the hardest, as if their applause could erase their past cruelty. Their faces showed both admiration and guilt, a strange mix that filled the air with raw emotion. It wasn't just respect they were giving her, it was surrender. They knew things would never be the same. And in that hall, surrounded by those who once doubted her, Zuri stood in quiet grace. She didn't gloat, she didn't seek revenge. She simply received their applause with the dignity of a woman who had been broken but never destroyed. The staff realized something powerful that day. They had not just witnessed a comeback, they had witnessed a transformation. Do you want me to continue with part 12? Zuri let the clapping settle into silence before she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority, yet it carried the softness of someone who had known pain. She didn't shout or gloat. She didn't even glance at Madame Chibali's pale, trembling face. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and addressed everyone with the quiet strength of a leader. "Those who build by tearing others down," she said, her words echoing across the hall, "will always fall. From today, Alpha Holdings will be built on dignity and respect." Her words struck deeper than any punishment ever could. The employees sat straighter in their seats, their hearts stirred. They knew she wasn't speaking from bitterness. She was speaking from truth. Zuri had lived through humiliation, yet here she was choosing grace instead of revenge. It was as if her pain had been transformed into wisdom, and now she was pouring it out like light filling a dark room. Some employees wiped their eyes quietly, touched by her strength. Others exchanged looks, realizing they had underestimated her all along. Madame Chibale, who once thought herself untouchable, lowered her eyes to the floor. For the first time, she could not fight back with pride or words. Zuri's presence filled the room like a queen who didn't need a crown to be recognized. Her golden gown shimmered, but it was her dignity that shone brightest. She spoke again, softer this time, yet her words carried even more weight. "Every person in this company deserves to be treated with fairness. We rise together, or we do not rise at all." The hall was so quiet that even the hum of the air conditioner could be heard. In that silence, Zuri had done something greater than revenge. She had rewritten the very culture of Alpha Holdings. And as her words settled into the hearts of everyone present, they knew they were witnessing not just a new boss, but the birth of a new era. Do you want me to continue with part 13? Tables turned 350 words. The room stayed silent after Zuri's words, but all eyes slowly shifted to Madame Chibale. The woman who once strutted through the halls with arrogance now looked small, almost fragile. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself, and her lips quivered as she forced out a shaky plea. "Zuri, please. I didn't mean, I was only trying to protect the company. Give me another chance." Her voice, once sharp and commanding, now cracked with desperation. The employees watched in disbelief. Just a week ago, Madame Chibale had mocked Zuri in front of them, stripping her of dignity. Now the tables had turned, and the proud boss was the one pleading for mercy. Some staff shook their heads, others whispered among themselves, but no one moved to defend her. They knew this was justice unfolding before their eyes. Zuri stood still for a moment, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. She could have shouted, she could have listed every insult, every wound Madame Chibale had caused. But instead she chose just a few simple words, the same ones that had once cut her deeply. Looking directly at her former boss, she said with quiet authority, "Pack your things." The words fell like thunder in the room. Gasps echoed. Madame Chibali's face crumbled, her pale cheeks flushing red with shame. She looked around desperately, but no one stood up for her. The same people who had once feared her now avoided her eyes, unwilling to be dragged down with her. Slowly, she lowered her head, realizing her reign had ended. This was her walk of shame. The very humiliation she had inflicted on Zuri returned to her in front of everyone. But unlike her, Zuri didn't smirk, didn't laugh, didn't gloat. She simply turned away, proving that true power doesn't need cruelty. It only needs justice. The employees understood then. Arrogance had fallen and dignity had won. Do you want me to continue with part 14? A new era begins, 350 words. In the same emotional and viral style? The air inside Alpha Holdings changed almost overnight. Where fear and gossip once ruled, hope and excitement now filled the halls. Zuri's presence alone carried a different kind of power, not the power of intimidation, but the power of respect. She walked through the office not as someone untouchable, but as a leader who saw every face and valued every effort. Employees who had once worked in silence now found their voices, because Zuri listened. She made it clear from the start, Alpha Holdings would no longer be built on fear, but on dignity, teamwork, and fairness. She promoted those who had been overlooked for years, the ones who stayed late, gave their best, yet were never recognized. Young interns suddenly found themselves mentored and encouraged, not mocked or ignored. Even the janitors and security guards felt the difference, because Zuri made sure no role was considered too small. Everyone mattered. New policies were introduced, transparent salaries, fair promotions, and a strict zero tolerance for humiliation. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about building a workplace where people wanted to come, where they felt proud to belong. Productivity soared not because of pressure but because people now worked with joy. They wanted to give their best for a leader who respected them. Word spread quickly across Kamanga. Newspapers wrote about her, television stations covered her story, and young women in schools and universities began calling her their inspiration. They saw in Zuri the proof that being humiliated didn't mean being finished, and that rejection could be the door to destiny. Mothers told their daughters about her, and fathers used her story to teach their sons about respecting women in leadership. Alpha Holdings was no longer just a company. Under Zuri's guidance, it became a symbol of transformation, a testimony that dignity and kindness could build an empire stronger than fear ever could. And in the heart of it all stood Zuri, the Woma. The story of Zuri spread like wildfire, far beyond the walls of Alpha Holdings. Newspapers splashed her picture across their front pages, and social media buzzed with videos of the very moment she walked into the conference hall as the new owner. People could hardly believe it. The same woman who had been mocked, humiliated, and fired in front of everyone was now the one giving orders from the top. It was the kind of story that gave people goosebumps, the kind that made strangers stop scrolling and whisper, "Wow, look at God." Zuri became more than just a businesswoman. She became a symbol of hope. For every employee who had ever been overlooked, for every woman who had been silenced, for every person who thought rejection meant the end of their story, Zuri's journey became proof that the tables can turn at any moment. She showed the world that sometimes, being pushed out isn't a loss. It's the very thing that forces you to step into your true destiny. People everywhere shared her name, her words, her calm strength. Schools invited her to speak, churches quoted her story, and young girls began to say, "If Zuri did it, so can I." She had walked through shame, but she came out crowned. And as her story went viral across Kamanga and beyond, one message rang louder than all the rest. Rejection is never the end. It can be the beginning of something far greater than you ever imagined. Do you want me to now merge all 15 parts into a single flowing 4,000-word script in one piece for you?